our webinar today on behavioral and social sciences. Before we begin, let's go through a very brief introduction of what IRIS is about. So IRIS is the Initiative for Research and Innovation in STEM. It's a platform that provides an opportunity to get recognized on the world stage. It inspires research and innovation, and it guides and mentors students to improve their research-based projects. I'm sure most people who are joining for our webinars are actually aware of what IRIS is all about. However, we just like to quickly take you through with a brief introduction. So our practice and purpose is to stimulate young minds to take an active interest in science and technology, to encourage students to use research as a tool for creating new knowledge, and to help build a strong scientific temper. What we normally advocate is that you observe things around you and that you question those things. And once you observe and you question, you get into a mindset wherein you want to research whatever you have observed and questioned. Once you research things, we then encourage you to use design thinking, to put your ideas together and to come up with innovative projects that will be able to aid your community and society as a whole. So we have an annual IRIS timeline up on this slide. As you know, this is the time of the year when we are normally doing workshops and the SRC is going out and doing seminars, etc. However, this year, because of the situation, we thought we would go in for the webinar mode. And it's been very encouraging to see that a number of you have actually registered for almost all the subject categories which we have done so far. And we hope that this trend continues for the subject categories remaining as well. As of now, we do not have any dates for IRIS, nor do we know about when we can actually say that the national fair, whether virtual or in person, will be held. However, we are continuing with the timeline as specified, and we hope to be able to be done with our webinars by mid-August so that we can open the portal for your synopsis submission. So the participation eligibility for IRIS is that it needs to be by students of Indian origin who are studying in schools based in India. In the past, we've had a number of applications that have come in from students who are of Indian origin but are not studying in schools based in India. And we are sorry, but we cannot allow you to participate. The contest is open for students of Indian origin who are studying in schools based in India. So you can participate individually or in a team of 2 students. We have 2 categories, the junior category, in which if you are in class 5 to class 8, you can participate and you will qualify for special awards and for the Broadcom Masters Award. Then we have the senior category for classes 9 to 12. You can participate in IRIS and you will be eligible for competition in the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair. We also have one more participation eligibility which we have to call out here. Students who have completed their class 12 board exams are not allowed to participate in IRIS. The platform is open only for students who are studying in classes 5 to class 12. If you've completed your class 12 board exam, we are sorry, but we will not allow you to participate. There are students who in the past we have seen try to take a gap year and want to participate. But again, very sorry, if you've completed your class 12 board exams, you have lost the window for participation. In order to be associated with IRIS, you can either volunteer with IRIS during the national fair or otherwise. You can volunteer your services as a mentor for students. You can be a mentor to any of the students who are participating. And if you have an organization or a lab which you would wish to offer up, we will be more than happy to connect with you so that we can then connect students who wish to use those lab facilities or your organizational facilities. So if you would like to collaborate with IRIS in any which way, please feel free to drop us a mail on contact@irisnationalfair.org. Now, without further ado, we'd like to introduce to you Ms. Priya Gupta. She's visiting assistant professor teaching behavioral sciences to undergraduate students at Amity University, Noida. She has done her master's in organizational psychology. She's also a facilitator for the Live, Love and Laugh Foundation. Welcome, Priya Gupta. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we really hope that you are able to help our students find that special project that will take them to the international level. I'll hand over the mic and the camera to you now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon, for the introduction. And I hope in the next 30 minutes, I will be able to convince and come up with the idea, like students actually come up with an ideas that can make more useful and then more projects that you can come up with. Okay. So uh, I'll start with this. I can you can see my, it's visible, right? My screen?
Yes, it is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So hello, everyone. Before starting with my slide, I would like to mention that this is a branch which actually takes a back seat, right? When we look up to the projects, when we actually look up to the facts, when we look up to all the logical part and then choose. So I might try in the next 30 minutes that all the facts, all the actually logical basis behind this course, which can help you come up with the new insights or new intervention or the tool that you can develop with. So let me start. So when we talk about behavior and social science, there are subcategories we can look up to: clinical and development psychology, cognitive psychology, neuroscience, physiological psychology, sociology, and social psychology. And there are more, but we'll be covering more or less 4 branch areas today: that clinical development, cognitive, sociology, and social psychology. I would like to mention, when we talk about psychology, people usually think about, a vague term that comes to your head that it might not be factual enough. People has assumption about it, little bit hypothetical, but we have came a long way where we actually talk about that it's a scientific study of mind and behavior, where we are talking about from birth till death. So when we're talking about our first brand, that is called clinical and development psychology, I would like to talk about a little bit more about clinical psychology, what it is, and where all we can work on, and what all has been done, and what more we can look up to at the school level. So when we're talking about clinical field, we're talking about the clinical terms that is there existed, and with the existence we have some presets that comes. For example, when we're talking about disorders, when we are talking about syndromes, when we are talking about clinical term that, for example, somebody who has a disorder as basic as anxiety disorder to have an autism, and there's this manual that we have, the protocol that one follows, the presets or the symptoms that is there. So as we know that no two individuals are same, so we might not classify everyone in the same category, but we have some sort of general criteria to look up to those things. So there's this DSM 5TR where we look up to all the disorders and then how one can deal with. So next, the term that is called development psychology. Development psychology is talk about how individual is different. And the two basic thing that comes when you talk about development psychology is genetics and environment. So how gene helps you to grow with a trait that you have, like the personality that we talk about, and how environment actually affects you in a lot of ways, helps you building your personality, helps you to be more comfortable in the environment, what all you get to know more about your own self and the other. So while we are talking about these 2 branches, I would like to mention that what all has been done, or what we all can look up to. So there's a very basic thing called learning difficulty. We all know that people at the age of 3 to 15, it's a very vulnerable age, the age group where we talk about very prone to learning disabilities and learning difficulty that we can find in children, and what all has been done, but there could be more area that we can look up to and can come up with an intervention or a tool that can help kids. So we know the time that we are living in right now, more than 5 months, more or less we need more tools or area that we can work up with, because if you look up and see that there are areas in clinical psychology where kids, students, and anyone that you can look around need more than anything else in today's world. So the area that this actually provides you with a lot of hope and lot of area which we are, as I told you before, the learning disability we are talking about, all can be done with those kids. So when we're talking about kids who are might be a slow learner, while they do not like that traditional method that we follow in a school, and what all we can come up with the thinking that, you know, what all we can provide, what all experimentally can be done, what intervention that we can provide to those kids, what tool we can develop which make them more easy, more comforting, more uh, playful than tiresome. So a lot of times we follow this thing that people who have difficulty might enjoy, not enjoy or indulge in studies, right? So this area has a lot of scope where we can actually work up with those kids, and where we can actually look up to the intervention model that uh, how do we engage these kids in learning, reading, writing. So that is one area. Second, we talk about personality. So when we're talking about personality, we're talking about the genes that we born with. We are talking about the dominant traits that one has and how it actually helps you in your development, right? And then we talk about environment that we have. And talking about environment, there are more branches that we are going to talk, sub branches that we are going to talk about, and I'll come up with that. So this is one basic area, and there are more we can work on this area. Then we have cognitive psychology. Okay, so this is psychology where we think about all the things that we have: perception, thinking, memory, attention, learning, problem solving. So we know how decision making could be something that can build a person personality, or build a person ability to work in an efficient way, right? So cognitive psychology is an area where we are talking about something very basic, like how to provide attention. How can attention be more efficient? How attention can be more, uh, how attention can be more enhanced. We're talking about memory. So when we're talking about memory, we automatically think that there are many ways to remember things. We have people who are more creative, we have people who are above intelligence, or people who are average in, like, who walks into an parameter where they are average in terms of intelligence, but they are more creative in a way to learn things. So when we look curiously to actually look at that area, when we're talking about memory and how you people actually remember things, to know things, to look at things. So if I remember, there was this one project that I look up to this last year, that uh, different people look at the same thing in a different way, right? So when we're talking about memory and remembrance, we are talking about learning skills, that how do we learn things. So as we all know that as the time is changing, teaching aids walked in our life. We had from blackboards to whiteboards to actually come up with the area where we are talking about uh, digital platform we are learning from. So how efficient we can become in that area, what more all can be done, what tools that we can actually provide which helps in our education, which aid in our efficiency, which can actually enhance our memory, or we can look up to how people look at things differently. Like when you're talking about remembrance, you're talking about people who have eidetic memory, right? And then we have people who are good at rote learning, and they can be good in a particular career area. So in a classroom where you have 30 students and 30 people look at the same thing in a different way, and what all ways that actually help people to look at things that can create a lot of other things. So this is one area which is very near dear to my heart, and which actually works in a lot of ways, and which needs more attention to uh, to see things and to actually come up with the ideas that can enhance practically in a classroom settings or in people's life. So this is one area where actually people can come up with the models or interventions, or to think up that what area can actually help what people. So uh, how attention can be more efficient for people, how memory can help somebody to come up with decision making, how thinking, how a different ways of thinking like critical thinking can actually makes you more smarter when you actually do things in your life, not just educational but your daily life. So from as basic as your daily life routine goes up, you talk about things which can help you in a practical way. So that is one area. Then we have uh, sociology and social psychology. So two areas which basically work with social behavior, how people observe everything around us, politically, economically, uh, demographically, culturally. We are talking about from individual, how actually individual relate with other person, relationships. Uh, Sociology is such a wide area, wide term. When we talk about sociology and social psychology, we talk about programs that can actually work, enhance our daily life, enhance our self-esteem, enhance our uh, group dynamics. So social psychology works with the attitude that a person holds, and how that attitude can be directed or gives a path which can lead up to a lot of things. Like for example, when we talk about leaders, what leaders that we have and what qualities that they possess, which actually helps one person to, not one person but two people in a lot of ways, come up with a lot of different ideas, a lot of different, like when you talk about social psychology, you talk about entrepreneurship, you talk about ideas, you talk about society and how society works. And as diverse we are, we have a lot of things to discover with. So this is one example that navigates actually public health problem. So when we're talking about problem from something so minor, uh, I would like to quote an example through an experiment that has already been done. So I don't know how many of you remember, but there's this very famous experiment that has been done by Dr. Clark, the psychologist, who works with this doll test. So what they did was, there were dolls, two dolls of two different race, white and black, and they worked with these kids who were from age 3 to 7, and they were actually uh, given these like these two dolls given to them, and then they were asked like which doll they would like to prefer, and how they could connect with that doll. And this experiment was done on African American girls, and it was, the result was so disturbing that people actually look up to those white dolls, and connect with them. So talking about cultural diversity, talking about all the prejudice, discrimination, or the presumptions that we have towards society, towards culture, towards religion, there are a lot of other pathways that we can actually look up to and come up with practical solutions. This area can actually work up, which can bring change in a school setup, in your classroom. You can be somebody who's curious that how people look at things so differently, and how things work. Something that might work for you might does not work for the other person, right? So why is that so? Why uh, somebody who belonged to one religion becomes so adamant that actually conditioning works? So when we're talking about conditioning, we're talking about how learnings help. So how learning makes you build your attitude, how learning helps you work in a group. So this is one area which was well defined but need more attention, that is group dynamics. So when you're talking about social psychology, we look up to the groups and we look things that can be more efficient in the groups, like how group actually works, how group can be more efficient, how group can be more cohesive, how thinking can be decreased, how brainstorming works in a group, what motivations that we can provide to a group that uh, a group becomes more cohesive. Diversity provided in a group, what works with different, like different age, what parameters that actually works in that group. So the area is like a bigger, like a larger than a sea that you can think of, but there are areas which we need to more uh, put at like more attention to, give more attention to and to look up, which can actually bring change, which can actually bring practical solutions which can actually be applied on. So when we're talking about social psychology or sociology, we actually try to bring more practical approach. We look at things with an approach that this interventional model that we provide on a sample, how it actually works, how an experiment can turn into a approach which we can apply on a wider area. So that is one area, like, one branch that you can work on. Then we have neuroscience. So neuroscience is a multidisciplinary science which concerned with the study that function with the nervous system. You actually talks about neurons, that how development in the individual to grow, to how neurotransmitters work. So when we're talking about neuroscience is a large area. You look at the biology, you look at the science that it has, but I would cover that there's this, when you talk about psychology, we have neuropsychologists and they work with more or less experimental data which can actually provide a change through tools that we have, that I existed, for example neurofeedback, biofeedback. So what these tools exactly do is, so these tools actually helps you to condition, to mold things in a way which are more apprehensive towards you. So for example, somebody who has a phobia or fear, we know that amygdala part is where it got more activated. Then we talk about the neurotransmitters. So when we talk about neuropsychology, we are talking about sleep cycle. We are talking about how neurotransmitters helps you to more effect, like to work more efficiently, to work in an environment with more productivity, with more enthu. So the energy that we put in, so there's an experiment that has been done with people that nowadays phone addiction itself is a very uh, difficult to actually acquire. It takes a lot of energy even to have a phone addiction. We don't even realize that, it is something that we have, the screen time that in today's, like now we have screen time, right? You can actually look up to your phone and you can see you have been using your phone for 11 hours, 12 hours, and you don't even realize. You can look up to the things that how many times you pick up your phone without even knowing. But when we look at from the neuroscience perspective or the psychology perspective, we are looking at the thing that even phone addiction requires a lot of energy. So if an addiction which is not even there, like it is there in our subconscious, it doesn't even require, it's not taking that much uh, efforts to do things, how much effort that we actually put into this area to make things work, to make it more efficient for people who might face difficulty in a lot of areas. Talking about phobias, talking about sleep pattern. These days, I guess, more or less everybody go through this thing that not sleeping at the night, but sleeping in the morning, and you are actually waking up in the afternoon. but we don't even realize how it is actually affecting our whole body, or things that working around us, and how we are actually paying attention towards things. So there has been a lot of research which has been done, and a lot of project that has been come up. There was this one research that was there. People were actually working with the tone of the alarm. So while waking up, the tone that we work with, the alarm tone, actually helps you wake. What sort of alarm tone actually helps you to wake up, which was very interesting. So somebody who come up with that, this alarm tone was more soothing or more triggering or more effective for you to wake up than the others. Then uh, how motor functioning working, like how some people who are not mentally there but physically more uh, affected at doing things, more reflexive, how reflexes works. So neuroscience has a lot of wide areas you can actually look up to. And then we are talking about cognitive psychology, we are talking about brain, we are talking about how we look at things, how things can actually change what we wanted to change. So we look up to things that, this is wrong with us. Like first step is actually acknowledging that this is going in a wrong direction, and things that actually can be done. But with that, I guess a lot of pre-assumptions or a lot of hypothetical situation walks in our head. So at times we believe that this is happening with us, like this can be a solution, but there are not scientific facts or logical reasoning behind it. So this is why more or less we need more time to spend on this area, to actually come up with the tools, to come up with the intervention, to come up with the models, to look what things can actually work in more scientific way. So that was the branches that we are talking about. Then we have ethical consideration. So when we are doing the research, when we are actually working with people, or when we are doing the experiment that we wanted to work on people, so there are a little bit, like there are things that we have to look up before actually applying on it. So uh, first, informed consent, which is very important. When you have people that you want to work with, you need to know that consent is very important. They need to understand that what they are getting into. I'm not saying that so and in an experiment it could be possible that you're working with a personality and you cannot tell the other person who's actually uh, coming up with the experiment, and then you telling the other person that it is based on a personality, which might affect the other person and impair your results. So but the other person needs to know that what this person is getting into, from time frame to things that the person might need to do in that experiment. So consent is the first foremost important thing to look up while you're doing the experiment. Study protocols. So when you're talking about study
So,
protocols, yes.
yeah, so Priya, I'd like to intervene over here. I think that's a very, very valid point, and I think that is something that we insist that the students should do, because any student who's taking part in this subject category, and if
Yes.
that person is actually going ahead with any kind of experimentation or collecting any sort of data, because if I understand correctly,
Yes.
this particular branch needs a lot of information in the form of people sharing well, personal information. So
Yes.
uh, I think this is very valid. This is something that needs to be kept in mind. Most of the time what we see is that students prepare questionnaires, etc., as a kind of an introduction to their experiment. So I think your point over here is very valid, that people need to know what they are getting into. We do have students coming back time and again asking us whether it is important to have those questionnaires in place, and whether it is important to have signatures or consent from people. So definitely an informed consent, as you just said, is really important. More so if the experimentation or if the project revolves around students, I mean revolves around people who are yet minors and they haven't, so in that case parental consent is also required. So yes,
Yes.
The informed consent part of it is really important. Thank you so much. Just
Yes.
continue. Thank you.
So when we are actually talking about minors, yes, parents' consent is very important because dealing with minors, you need some protocols that actually behavioral science is talking about when we are talking about people, when we are talking about working with people. People need to know that what they're getting into. Yes. Second, study protocol. As we usually assume that this is behavioral science, people are observing. So there are a lot of vague areas that people get into. There are well-defined protocols that has been there mentioned by very renowned, if you talk about APA, American Psychological Association. So there are protocols which need to be followed when you're doing an experiment, when you are involving people into that experiments, and uh, to make it more objective. So a lot of time what it happens is the experiment becomes subjective because we are working with people, we are talking about subjective response. To make it more objective, we actually need to look up to the areas that how it can be more scientific, factual and objective. So there are study protocols which we need to look up before actually going into an experiment or going into a project. Then well defined sample. So why a well defined sample? Because when we are working with people, as I said before, that no two individuals are same, right? So somebody who's good at one thing, it is not necessary the other person will also be good at. So when you're defining the sample in your study, you're making it sure that this is what area that I actually took up, and this is where we can generalize or we can apply a tool that we are providing or an intervention that we are providing to people, because it will be more helpful. So when we are talking about people who have learning difficulty, right? So that sample is very uh, like very minorly based on few people, which cannot be generalized on everyone. When we're talking about people, when you're talking about a classroom, so well defined sample is very important. Then we have confidentiality. It is very important that you make sure that the subject uh, who are there in the experiment would, all the information that the person is providing would remain confidential. Nothing would be leak out, nothing would be go which they do not want. So confidentiality is very very important when you're talking about experiment, when you're talking about working with people. Then well structured method that you use in a study. So method that we have a lot of methods, from uh, descriptive method to qualitative method. That so when we're talking about psychology or any other area, we are talking about quantitative and qualitative, right? So describing that what method you're using and how you're making it more efficient, more structured, more uh, accessible, how you're interpreting things, you need to mention in your study. So how you infer something is very important. Then we have reliability and validity. So your study need a well defined mentioning that on what people it is valid on, how far it has been reliable, on like what all pilot study you have done, what all can be done, what all similar areas that you have looked up, or the similar tools that are already there. You can actually put a reliability and validity and then check up to it what your tool and intervention is providing. So that is very important, how reliable your tool or intervention or model is. Then the last but very important, experimental biases. So when we talk about biases, before even taking up the project and doing experiment, we have these hypothetical situations in our head, and we well define those situations. For example, while doing an observation, you might think that this will lead to this area, like this will lead to some sort of result, and you already decide that this study is going supposed to go in this path, supposed to go follow this path. So it is very important that you keep those biases to yourself. A study could lead to a path which you might not even imagine, because while we're talking why this intervention and everything needs to be scientific, because when you're talking about facts, when you're talking about logical point of view, you need to look at the experiment, that how and one experiment is going, how one project is going. Yeah. So it is very important to keep your thoughts to yourself, to not make your project more biased, which you already have things in your head. So that is very important. I guess that is all I have
So,
with me.
I'd
Yes.
like to comment on the experimenter's bias. I think, again, this is very, very valid, and it's very important to keep this in mind because normally we have preconceived notions about a lot of things. So, especially in this particular subject category, as Priya has just said, we definitely need to go into whatever experiments we are doing or whatever research we are carrying out without uh, without having our bias there, or rather with an unbiased mind, so to speak. Because yes, if you're getting some kind of well, whatever research you're collecting and whatever you're getting from
Data.
the forms
Yes.
that you're getting filled, if you already have a kind of a bias in your mind, you will start thinking, oh, this is all rubbish that is coming in, if I can use that in layman's terms. So, but on the other hand, you might actually be getting some very valid information which may bring you to a very new, well, a new way of thinking, a new idea, something which has never been explored before. So this experimenter's bias is something that anyone who's getting into the behavioral science category needs to keep in mind.
Yes, very well said, ma'am. I would like to mention one more thing that I forgot. When we are talking about social psychology, when we are talking about sociology, this one area that is very uh, that I'm very keen to work on, and I would like students to actually look up to. Then, when we're talking about relationship, we're talking about a parent-student relationship. Sorry, a parent-child relationship or a teacher-student relationship. So, people or students can actually work up in this area as well. So, how we have well-defined parenting, but I guess uh, there's no protocols or parameters that you can look up to how a parenting should be done, how things can be go in a path. But there are well defined area where we look up to things that, this is supposed to be an ideal parenting, or this is supposed to be an ideal teacher, or these are things a teacher should do to kids, to students, or a parent should treat a child. So uh, an area where parents are actually uh, looking up to the games, looking up to a model which they can follow for a good parenting. They always wanted to look up to things that how one can become a good parent, right? So I guess more or less, uh, the child and children and students are the one who can actually come up with these things, that this is how we supposed to get treated. And like there are many other ways, like no child thinks in a similar way, and no parenting goes in the same way. So as parenting comes with the versatile area, this is one area can actually kids can work on, can look up to the things that they can come up with a tool or an intervention or an experiment which can provide new insights. So yes, that was one area.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Um, I think because we are having a discussion on, well, ethical considerations, and we're
Yes.
talking about behavioral and social sciences, we're going to actually ask people who are attending the webinar to either type in their queries or type in their comments into the chat section, and let's discuss this. Because again, what we have found in the past is that we do not get many behavioral science projects. We do get a number of them, but not many. And perhaps this time of lockdown has been a time wherein everybody has actually been, well, dealing with a lot of uh, things which are centered around behaviors, behavioral patterns,
Yes.
behaviors which have been affected by circumstances which are beyond people's control, beyond anyone's control, so to speak. So I think we would really like people who are attending this webinar to either raise their hand or type in their questions in the chat sections so that we can discuss this here.
Yes, yes. Uh, Adding on to that, what you're talking about, like how we are dealing with COVID, like there are actually people who are coming with a lot of different ways to adjust the new normal that we have now. And this is another area that people wanted, like people are actually working with, that what are the more adjusting area that can there, because we don't know what next is coming, but we can come up with the solution that is there with us, and we can like we can widen the horizon that we have as of now. So yes, more or less with the Q, like we're going to start with the Q&A session, right? Q&A.
Yes, let's open up for questions now.
Yes.
Shrey, if you could put up the iris, the other slides, the iris slides.
Right.
Thank you.
Participants, the chat window is now open. So do feel free to type your questions in the chat. You may also use the raise hand icon and then we will unmute you. Okay, so our first question is in. It's coming on the private chat. It's from Siddharth Merchant. Okay. He asks, how much research is considered adequate in order to draw a conclusion?
How much research is adequate? Okay, so when we are talking about the sample size or the pilot study, we basically look up to 100 people, like the number of sample size supposed to be 100, but when we particularly talking about an experiment, it could be less, because we're providing experiment where we have two groups, control group and experimental group. So a research could come up with less than 50 people. There are researches and the intervention has been developed where the sample size was less than 50 when we are working with the experimental group, and then we have control group. But when we are talking about uh, a topic like such as attitude, personality, which is already has been defined, well defined before, we require more data uh, to back up with. So I guess this might satisfy the question that the person was asking, Siddharth.
So I'd like to add
Yes.
to this, Siddharth, if you're asking about the sample size, as Priya says, 100 is a good enough number, but that would be for, well, when we talk about the international platform wherein our students have participated in previous years as well, what we have noticed is that the larger the sample size, somehow the better the visibility. So, in my opinion, I think you should actually keep 100 as a minimum number,
Yeah.
if that is possible, depending on what your research centers around. So, there is no maximum limit to the sample size. For example, if you're doing a project which involves, questionnaires which have to be given to students in your school, so I think your school size would easily be about 1,500 or more students.
Yeah.
So if that is a possibility, if you can go beyond that, great. But please keep in mind that whatever you take and whatever you need as information from anybody undergoing, the experimentation that you're conducting, you definitely need an informed consent from them.
And furthermore, to add on to that, that when we're talking about the sample, I would like to say that the diverse your sample is, the reliability and validity increases. Like you can actually generalize on larger people, the population that we're looking up. So while you're taking the like when we're talking about survey method, right? When we're actually talking about questionnaires, so not just your school, but the other schools that we have, like you have around, it would be more convenient and sorry, not convenient, but more uh, resourceful and fruitful for your research to actually make inclusive. like take more data and more versatile data, like more diverse data that you can look up. So that will actually help you to generalize things on a larger population. So that is one thing I wanted to add on.
We have two questions that are similar, so I'm going to read them out together. Ahana Roy and Sampurna, they ask, the first one is, maybe perform the survey in virtual mode under this pandemic situation, and the other one is that with the handicap of lockdown, how do we go about with data collection process and implementing actual investigative procedures? To do it, Sampurna says that to do it virtually is impossible. So, ma'am, if you could shed some light.
So can you repeat the first question? Like,
So the first question is, maybe perform the survey in the virtual mode under pandemic situation.
okay. So I know the hard times that we have, but I guess that is the challenge when we are working with the survey. I remember there's this technique called uh, snowballing technique. So people actually come up with the Google Forms, and they provide they connect with other people, like so how snowball works. So you have one people and the other person has four people they're providing. So that was one way. uh, when we're talking about sampling, it is also comes in non-random sampling. So that is the one area of sampling. You have other areas as well. So when we're talking about quantitative data, it become a less tiresome. But when we're talking about qualitative data, to actually have an experiment on, to look up to the techniques, for example, you can have virtual talks. When we talk about virtual talks, you can have narrative analysis, you can have qualitative method which can be uh, provided and helps you to collect the data uh, to help in your research. These are the two ways, and there are more. Like you can actually look up the things that how things work. Like for example, you need to define what problem or what area you are looking up and how it can be resolved. So quantitative data can be resolved through Google Forms, one way. uh, Qualitative data can be resolved through narrative analysis or techniques that we have, like storytelling. Or if you go for the experimental method, you become the observant and you have people on the screen, and what all you wanted to ask them that might work. I know there will be a consequences, but when we're talking about COVID, it's not just there in India, but it's a worldwide thing. So if you're going for particular research, there's this thing which come under the clause. So it might help. If anybody wanted to add on, please pitch in.
Thank you for that. I think has been one of our participants at IRIS, and good to see you on the platform today, Ahana.
Right. There's another question coming in from Shrikant K. He asks, using tech to monitor one's own behavioral patterns and autocorrect the same eventually. Is this something that is feasible or of interest?
Sasha, I did not get the question. Can you please repeat?
Okay, so am I audible now?
Yes, you're audible. Okay.
So Shrikant's question is, using tech to monitor one's own behavioral patterns and autocorrect the same eventually. Is this that something that is feasible, or is it something of interest?
It is something that is feasible or something of interest. Okay. So this is something. I mean, you can. Malab, this is your malab, what exactly you're looking up? Like what sort of answer you're actually looking up?
I think the question that Shrikant is asking is whether monitoring one's own behavior patterns and finding a solution for the same is something that would be feasible as a project.
As a project or as an experiment?
Shrikant, if you could type the rest of your clarification.
Yeah, because the query is, I guess, incomplete. So
Yes.
here you're saying that you would like to uh, do an experiment on you and then come up with the result, right? If I got it correctly.
Shrikant will just have to type that into the chat now. We'll move to the next question, which is from Sushil Pandey. He asks, how to get the project validated? Can you suggest some agencies who are ready to take students' projects seriously? Think
Agency for the students to actually take students very seriously. So uh, okay, so when we're talking about research and we are talking about to actually find a lab to work on or places to actually work on, I would want you to look up online and look up, first of all, American Psychological Association, APA. Look up to APA. They have ways to come up, like there are well defined protocols and ways to come up with areas that you can work on and to places that you can work on. You become the member of that particular association. Second, because networking helps. So this is one area where you can actually develop a network. There are a lot of people from diverse group actually become member of that association. Second, we have more or less, I guess, journals and online based, like they actually provide internship, and then you can actually work in a field, students, because it is very hard for a school student uh, for people to actually take you seriously. And but there are, I am not very sure of all the names that I can recall of, but this can be something which,
So
is there any way which we
I'd
can
like to
provide?
add here.
Yes.
I'd like to add here. First and foremost, the American Psychological Association is one of the organizations that offer a special award at the IRIS National Fair
Yes.
because of the IRIS Connect through the affiliation with the International Science and Engineering Fair. So, as Priya mentioned just now, getting going online and checking out organizations such as this will definitely give you a very good idea of the way in which experimentation is to be conducted. The other thing is, don't be deterred by the fact that you're just a school student, because that
Yes.
is what IRIS is all about. Once you conduct your research and you submit your synopsis, the SRC is fully aware of the kind of projects that would make an impact, and they are there to guide you. If in case you need to go and get connected with some organization, they will make those suggestions as well. The other thing is, um, it's always good to document whatever research you want to do, to put it out there in the form of an idea when you're submitting your synopsis, and then come back with your project as you wish to present it.
And there are, I guess, association as well that they're working with kids. Like I remember MHR, like government association as well, who give offer to school kids to actually work in a field. A lot of NGOs also helps you to work in a field. Like I remember, Goonj is one of them. Manas Rachna is an NGO which actually works with the kids. Uh, there are more NGOs that if you want to work with kids and if you want to work within particular area, or uh, for example, if you want to work in a clinical psychology area, there are actually very many NGOs uh, who work with these kids who would like you to volunteer and then come up. You guys can come up with your own data and you can make an inclusive area. So I guess you can look up to NGOs as well. That helps. Helps a lot, and they're more prone to accept kids who wanted to volunteer, who wanted to work with kids. We have more questions.
so. Up till about half a second ago, we had a few hands raised, but I think their questions got answered along with the other questions that were asked.
Ma'am, I was asked a question on a personal chat.
Ishura, you are not audible.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi. Sorry. So I got asked a question on personal chat where a student says that if they were to search on the effects of COVID-19 lockdown on people and choose a particular age group, what category would their research come under?
What I mean, you're asking about an age group and the categories that they can look up to.
They say they will choose an age group, but they wanted to question what subcategory would that research come under.
I did not get it.
So the student wants to conduct a research on a specific age group and assess the effects of the COVID-19 lockdown on that age group.
Okay.
So they want to know such a research would come under which subcategory?
Okay, which subcategory? So it depends on the statement of your problem. So what, you have defined an age, what area you want to work with, effect of COVID. So when you're talking about COVID, there could be areas that you want to come up with, what parameters that you want to look. For example, when you're talking about social psychology, we're talking about the attitude that has been changed. We're talking about the motivation level. We're talking about the interaction. We're talking about how actually people who are extrovert become more vulnerable in the situation. So what are parameters, what are variables that you're looking up which actually define in what category you look up, so which will come under. So you need to define your variables first. Second, then the subcategory will walk in. So when you define attitude, when you define personality, it comes under social psychology. When you talk about thinking pattern, when you talk about perception, when you talk about attention, when you're talking about memory, you talk about cognitive psychology. When you talk about how environment is affecting that particular age group, you're talking about how their development process has been affected in this COVID. So that comes under development psychology. So you need to actually look up to your variables and the problem statement that is there, and then define the subcategory area. I guess that helps. Does this answer?
I think
Yes.
it does.
Yes.
So I'm just looking at the chat section, and I'm looking at Ahana Roy once more. Ahana, you're asking if the survey is allowed to be performed in virtual mode, then how do we get the consent of the respondent? I think that's pretty simple. You first send a mail, or you send a Google form, to ask for the consent, and only then can you ask the respondent to fill in the form.
No, I think she's trying to ask if people are they are getting the information filled virtually. So how to get the consent? Like on paper, we get the signature from them. So
when we're talking about the virtual area, when we're talking about the actually Google Forms or other forms that are there, Monkey, so it actually provides you what all experiment is all about, and you have checkbox I'm consent, this is my consent that I'm filling all the information that has been there with my consent. You actually make a checkbox that I'm consenting to that particular questionnaire or the thing that you're asking for. So, and also when you mention in the words that this is going to be done, not exactly what you're measuring, but you're mentioning that it will take 15 minutes from time to actually mention all the things that is going to be there. The person needs to know beforehand. So you mention those things and you make a checkbox that the person is clicking those checkbox and then going ahead, going furthermore. So that actually providing the subject that the person is giving you his or her consent towards the survey or towards the experiment. So that is one way. Other, when you are when you're providing the Google form or any virtual area, you mention beforehand. So when you're providing on mail, you specifically mention that this mail is regarding this and we would like you to participate, and it's a volunteer participation. So when you portray that it is a volunteer participation. It's a volunteer thing. Like you can leave if you do not feel comfortable. You can mention beforehand that this is about that, and you can leave in between as well if you don't feel like going ahead. So mentioning it beforehand that it is a volunteer thing that the other person is doing makes one way or the other that it is a consent that the other person, the subject, is giving it to you. So that is one way.
I think while people are still thinking about their questions, maybe we can quickly put on the IRIS video, because I have a question, a private request in the chat to saying please elaborate on the competition or the fair. So let's just get the video on and then we'll come back to the questions.
Are you ready for the ride of your life? Well, it all begins right here. Your first step is picking a category you can enter by yourself or with a partner. If you are in 5th to 8th standard, you will be in junior category. If you are in 9th to 12th, you are in senior category and have a chance of making it all the way to ISEF. Now that you know which category you are in, it is time to find out which subject your project comes under.
At IRIS, you have a variety of 21 subject categories to choose from, ensuring that your project has a category that fits. The categories include animal sciences, behavioral and social sciences, biochemistry, biomedical and health sciences, biomedical engineering, cellular and molecular biology, chemistry, computational biology and bioinformatics, earth and environmental sciences, embedded systems, energy, sustainable materials and design, engineering mechanics, environmental engineering, material sciences, mathematics, microbiology, physics and astronomy, plant sciences, robotics and intelligent machines, system software, and transitional medical sciences.
A display shows the public and the judges what you have done. You're looking to attract and inform visitors about your project. To make it easy for people to access your results by creating a clear, attractive and concise display. The focus should be the work. Take a look at this reference.
Your title should be simple and must accurately represent your research.
Take photographs or videos of important parts or phases of your experiment to use in your display.
Prepare a miniature of your model in case your prototype is too large to be carried along.
Make sure your display is logically presented and easy to read.
Use neat, colorful headings, charts, and graphs to present your project. Pay special attention to labeling.
Be sure to adhere to the size limitations and safety rules when preparing your display.
The IRIS journey begins with registration on the website www.irisnationalfair.org with submission of online synopsis and supporting documents. These entries are prejudged by the IRIS Scientific Review Committee, and shortlisted projects are sent an email inviting them to participate in the IRIS National Science Fair. Winners of the IRIS National Science Fair qualify for an intensive series of mentoring camps and get the opportunity to represent India at platforms such as the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair in the United States of America. ICEF is the world's largest pre-college STEM competition. Over 265 Indian students have won over 160 awards at this competition, competing with over 6 million high school students from all over the world each year. Not only are you getting a chance to make your nation proud, but if you're lucky, you could join the 31 Indian students who have had minor planets named after them.
So guys, please don't miss this opportunity.
It's your turn now.
If you're innovative and you really want to bring about a change in the world, I think IRIS is the right place for you.
If you enjoy science and math and computer science and so on, so I mean, it gives you a platform to show what you've done, and you have a chance to go to ISEF too.
If science actually kindles your curiosity and you're really passionate about it, IRIS provides you the largest platform in India to show your talent.
Applying to IRIS, not only get to have a great experience, you meet great people and great mentors at that. They're not judges, they're not judging you, they're mentoring you, they're teaching you. They make you learn new things.
In the end, it's not about winning or losing, it's about experience, and IRIS National Fair guarantees great experience.
Don't tell people what your dreams are. Show what your dreams are through IRIS.
It's once in a lifetime experience.
It's your turn.
It's your turn. It's your turn.
It's your turn. It's your turn.
It's your turn.
It's your turn.
Right, so that was our video showing you what students who have participated in IRIS over the years have to say about the platform, and encouraging you to participate as well. We notice we have a number of teachers with us today. Thank you so much, teachers, for joining us. And thank you, students, also for taking time out to be part of these webinars. We hope these webinars are helping you understand the subject categories better and helping you to actually decide on what your project should be about. We've got a few slides here which are showing you what an ideal display should look like. If there are any more questions, please do not hesitate to type those questions into the chat or to raise your hand.
So there's one question that's come in, ma'am. It's from Arav. Arav asks, when someone faces a certain mental problem, how important is it for a psychologist to monitor the patient afterwards, and for how long would they do this?
How long? Okay. So this is very basic, that you need to understand that the time cannot be defined. For example, somebody who is facing a mental health problem, an issue, not everybody is same, and not everybody has the same coping strategy or mechanism that works with. So every individual is different, right? So it depends on an individual or the issue that we're dealing with. It depends upon that parameter. Monitoring is very important, of course. You monitor, you have feedback from them, you have constant touch to actually see how the progress is going, right? So you cannot define a particular time period for a person because it differs. Second, we need to understand that it is not something which can be pre-assumed that, we are going through a mental health problem and it will take 1 week or 1 month or 1 year and you will be fine. And you will be back to square one. So you need to understand that healing takes time and healing differs. So not two individuals are different, like similar. So you cannot actually put a time limit on it, time frame on it. This is long it will take to heal something. So yes, I guess this might answer.
So again, there's something I'd like to add to it over here. At the end of the day, the sad part is that in a lot of cases that we see, mental health is not recognized as something that people want to go for help for. So the very first step probably is to be able to recognize that there is a problem. Also, schools in India today have counselors. So if there is an issue, the counselors are there to actually listen and to understand the issue. So I'm talking about at a school level. But again, if there is a mental health issue, or if there are behavioral patterns that are not seeming to be normal, then that should definitely be acknowledged and recognized, and one should definitely seek help for it.
Ma'am, I like to intervene here. So, as you said, not seeming to be normal. So when we do not use the norm, like there could be as normal as it can seem. There are times where you cannot recognize the pattern. So acknowledging it, yes, of course, it's there, the first deal. But there are times when we feel that everything seems to be normal, but it is not normal because how we define normal is very vague. Like it is up to us what we define normal and how we define normal. So it can be as normal as feeling an anxiety movement or nervousness. But what is important is to talk about the stigma, like psychology and mental health becomes a very stigma, like the stigma that we need to remove, right? So when we're talking about mental health, it's very important that one needs to understand it is normal. It's actually normal to talk about it, to express your emotion that, this is what I'm feeling. And it might seem normal to other people and to you as well. But when you acknowledge it, that it is affecting you in a way. It is affecting you in a way which is hampering your growth, which is hampering your health, both mentally and physically. So it might not necessary that you would see a physiological change in your body to recognize something is happening, something that needs to be acknowledged, something that needs to be addressed. But when you talk about things, when you talk about mental health, something as minor that your friend has a problem with you, or you had a fight with your friend, or you do not talk about a secret which is affecting you on a daily basis, which needed to be talked about. That is something which one needs to address. So yes, sorry I did cut you, but I guess we have more students and teachers that were there with us, and more or less this is the time where everybody is feeling so many emotions and a lot of things that they might think that we are not able to deal with, or a lot of things that we might not know how to act, behave, or express. So yes.
Yes, the only thing that I was trying to say here was that one should not ignore any behavioral changes.
Yes,
so when I mention normal, I mean the normal way in which somebody behaves. If there are any changes to that behavioral pattern, then one should definitely acknowledge, recognize, and seek help for them. Just like we would if in case we get a fever or we start coughing or sneezing. Again, that tells us that our body is out of the normal, health parameters. So yes, there is a question here which says, hi ma'am, what are the ways students can handle the present COVID situation? Handling the present COVID situation is something that we're all wondering about. And if you are asking about handling the lockdown situation, or the being at home, or the not going to office or college or school situation, then I think everybody is devising ways and means to do that. And the more ways and means that you could share, the greater it would be. Then we have a question again from Siddharth Merchant. If we have a project branching over 2 topics, how will it be judged? So Siddharth, to answer that, we have the IRIS Scientific Review Committee, and once you submit your project, they will take a look at that and they will get back to you and suggest which subject category the project needs to go into. Again, it will be a suggestion from them, and you will be the one who can choose whether you want to put it. For example, if you have a behavioral science project which has something to do with medicine, again, you would be given a suggestion by the SRC as to which category is more, it is leaning more towards. So again, the choice is yours, but the advice will definitely be given to you. Shashwati is asking, what is the date of submission of synopsis? Yes, and the responses, these dates will be available on the IRIS National Fair website soon. Right? I think we've taken a good hour and 15 minutes so far. So thank you so much, Priya. Thank you for joining us and for chatting with all of us and for clearing so many doubts. Participants, if there's anything that you would like to write to us about, please feel free to get in touch with us. Of course, recordings of all webinars are available on irisnationalfair.org. And if you have anything that you would like to mail us about, please get in touch with us at contact@irisnationalfair.org. And do follow us on all the social media links that you see on your screen as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I would like to mention, as we are ending the session, I would like to mention that you people have started with a great initiative, and what all that you're providing, from having a mentor on your side for these school students and actually coming up with their own innovative ideas. I guess this is a platform, I would say, give a lot of opportunities, a lot of idea that for a person can have. So I would like to just mention that you're doing, it's a great job. It's a great platform to be one on. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this platform. We will definitely be in touch with you if we get some queries, and we would definitely like to have you involved with us as well.
Yes,
yeah.
Even I would like to do that. So thank you, Ishita, as well. Thank you actually to making me asking me this thing to actually come up with the webinar and going for the whole process. Thank you.
So
Thank
we have a very, very dedicated set of people, our IRIS SRC, whom you've seen on the other webinars, I'm sure, that are there on the IRIS website. We have this dedicated group of people who take time out and who are so enthused with the participants that, over the years, this is actually a platform that they drive. We just facilitate. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.